Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of February the 7th and 8th, 2026. Now, one thing about my videos is that there are frequent complaints that there are no timestamps. That, you, for example, want to find your sign in the middle of a 2-hour video, and it seems to be impossible because there aren't any timestamps. And certainly that might seem to be the case. I mean, what happens is I do actually put in the timestamps, and YouTube has this system for sort of creating separate thumbnails for each chapter, and you can scroll on the video to see the chapter. But what happens is that pictorial side to it seems to break down over the course of the day, and I'm not quite sure why that is the case. Of course, I often don't notice it because I'm not really a visual person. I just open the descriptions if I want to go to a particular part of a video, and I look at the text of the chapters, and I click the text. And of course, if you click the text in the description in my videos, that will always work. However, if you're reliant on visual cues, then there might be a problem. And I think that might be what's going on. Now, I'm going to try and fix the problem for once and for all, but it seems to be weird. It seems like I asked ChatGPT, and it didn't really have much of an idea, but it said if you change one little part of the text, it resolves the problem. And that is true, but I don't know how long it resolves a problem for. Now, on the subject of confusion, I want to talk about Mercury in Pisces in this video. Mercury went into Pisces, I think London time, actually late on Friday, but Mercury is now definitely in Pisces, so I want to talk about it a bit. I mean, I'm not going to say anything earth-shattering. I've talked enough about politics and Epstein, so I thought I would give that a break. So anyway, let me start off by looking at the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend. So here's a chart for the weekend set for midnight on Sunday, February the 8th. So here's the chart, and you can see that the moon is in Scorpio. So what happens is that at around, 13 minutes past 7 in the evening on Saturday, the moon moves into Scorpio. So that means if you're in the Americas, this afternoon, or Saturday afternoon, we've got this changeover. So, that is an important change, moon moving from Libra to Scorpio. We don't have quite so much air. Yes, the air is hissing out of the system, as you can see. We've already got Mercury. Mercury has left Aquarius, so now we've only got 4 planets in air signs, and additionally the moon is leaving Libra. So not as much air as we used to have, and moon in Scorpio does present something rather different, particularly during the latter part of the weekend. But early Scorpio, late Libra, it does have something in common. It's all part of the Via Combusta, that part of the sky between 15 degrees Libra and 15 degrees Scorpio. It's still there. I think the Scorpio part of the moon in the Via Combusta is probably more intense than the Libra side. More likely that things just happen, especially now that we've got Venus making a square aspect to Uranus, and that is an important aspect. So the thing about that Venus square Uranus is that Venus is essentially acting as a trigger. So we know that Uranus is stationary direct. I mean, okay, it went stationary direct on Wednesday. That was a few days ago, but it's still not moving very much. And Venus is making a square to this powerful Uranus. Mercury having just made that square, so it really does stir things up. And so it might be a weekend where things could happen. So we shouldn't assume necessarily that everything will go to plan, and I'm sure there'll be interesting things going on as far as the news flow, perhaps as far as Epstein, and it just keeps going on, doesn't it? So as far as Saturday is concerned, the moon is certainly moving through Libra for some of the day, moving through late Libra, and as far as what the moon will be doing. At the beginning of a weekend, we will have a trine between the moon and Venus. So that's something that might give the early part of the weekend a bit of a lift. Additionally, we've got Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. So Mercury is where's Jupiter gone? Yeah, so Mercury in very early Pisces makes that sesquiquadrate, and with that sesquiquadrate, there might be a lot to say. I mean, even though it's in water signs, Mercury is in a water sign. Jupiter is in a water sign, and Mercury is now ruled by Jupiter because it is in Pisces. So that Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter, we might be saying more than usual, but we mustn't forget now Mercury is in Pisces. I mean, I'll be talking about Mercury in Pisces in more detail at the end of the video, but Mercury is fallen in Pisces. It's not a sign where Mercury functions very well, all things being equal. And so with that sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, we might say things or reach conclusions which may not necessarily be right. There hasn't been so much water around recently, but now we've got I won't say buckets of water, because we've still got loads of planets in Aquarius, but having a moon in Scorpio and Mercury in Pisces, the emotion levels are certainly going up, and perhaps some of us have forgotten how emotional things can be, and perhaps we've also forgotten how much our emotions can be influenced by external factors. So that is definitely something that we do need to take into consideration. And then Sunday we've got the moon definitely moving through Scorpio. It makes a trine to the North Node in Pisces, and it in the end makes a square to Mars. That is the final aspect of the weekend. Moon in Pisces square Mars Moon in Scorpio square Mars in Aquarius, and that can be a rather difficult aspect. It can be quite frustrating, and it might be about getting annoyed with someone, feeling that they are getting under our skin, or maybe we're getting under their skin. So be careful what you say. Remembering also Mercury is sesquiquadrate Jupiter, so Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter can just encourage us to say something that we might later regret. So that's the broad picture for the weekend, geocentrically set for New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, then halfway through the weekend, the moon is at 26 degrees Libra. So all of Saturday in Australia, New Zealand, and East Asia, the moon is making the moon is in Libra, and it's making a trine to Venus. So in Australasia, with moon trine Venus, it might be quite an easy day. There are things to say. I think being able to relate to people on a verbal, mental level, should be relatively easy. And it's not until later in the weekend, I don't know, maybe around sort of early morning, I don't know, off the top of my head, something like 6 in the morning, something like that, 6 in the morning on Sunday, the moon moves into Scorpio. So by the end of a weekend, everyone is experiencing the moon in Scorpio, even if you're in New Zealand. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So I'm not quite sure how much there is to report. The Earth is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. I think that Saturn Earth sesquiquadrate probably more of a feature at the beginning of a weekend. I think by the end of a weekend it might not be so much of a problem, but with Earth sesquiquadrate Saturn, we're certainly aware of what could be holding us up. And if we do find that we're being blocked, we should just take the view that it's just a passing problem. Additionally, we have got Venus making a semi-sextile to Mars. So there is heliocentric Mars at 7 degrees Aquarius, heliocentric Venus at 7 degrees, 8 degrees Pisces. So Venus semi-sextile Mars, we can't get on with everyone. And that might be the message. Some people just great. They really do. And, I just sort of talked about the moon square Mars happening right at the end of a weekend. And it may be that moon square Mars, the end of Sunday, sort of links in with Venus semi-sextile Mars heliocentrically. So perhaps we have to be careful, who we mix with, who we relate to. Perhaps, we need to err on the side of caution. So if we don't think we're going to get on with someone, maybe we shouldn't try. We should perhaps interact, later on, maybe next week, when things are perhaps a little easier. And and don't forget, geocentrically, one thing I should have mentioned and perhaps emphasize more, geocentrically on Sunday we've got Venus sextile Uranus. So just a reminder of that aspect. Here it is. There's Venus square Uranus. I mentioned Venus square Uranus as a trigger, but it may not just be a trigger. We need to look at the aspect in itself. And so if you've got Venus square Uranus, it might be about relationships, and relationships not necessarily turning out as expected, especially now that the moon is in the Via Combustor. So, don't make assumptions about other people. They could do something that you really hadn't planned for. I mean, that's looking at it from a somewhat negative view. There is a positive aspect or a positive dimension to Venus square Uranus, and that could be, for example, people turning up when you didn't expect it. You have a sudden meeting, maybe with someone you've known from the past, maybe someone completely new. So as far as other people are concerned, I think it's important to be open-minded. Additionally, Venus square Uranus can have an artistic dimension. It is about what we are creating, what we're trying to create, and perhaps we can create things which really are interesting, that really stand out in terms of their creative value. So if you want to be original, then now might be your chance. So that is the broad astrological picture for the weekend, and now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of February the 7th and 8th, 2026. Aries. It is a bit of a changeover weekend. The the weekend starts with the moon in Libra, and then it moves into Scorpio. So, with the moon in Libra, that's quite a straightforward placement for the moon, especially with all those, Aquarian planets. So perhaps, you start the weekend, Aries, taking the view that things are, fairly straightforward, especially if you work on a mental level. There's a lot to think about, there's a lot to say, and it's by and large straightforward. And I think that you have a chance to listen to what other people have got to say. They're prepared to listen to you, and there may be a certain rationality. So if something needs to be discussed in a rational setting, then try to focus on Saturday, perhaps early on Saturday. If you're in if you're in the Americas, because the moon does move into Scorpio, and if you're in the Americas, well, in California, the moon moves into Scorpio pretty early. I think it's at 13 minutes past 11 in the morning on Saturday. If you're in New York, it will be a bit later. It won't be until 2:30. I think it's 2:13 in the afternoon. So, if possible, wherever you are, try to keep the focus on Saturday in terms of just being rational. If there's something that needs to be discussed, just do it as early as possible. And then moon moves into Scorpio, and with the moon moving into Scorpio, that does mean that things possibly get more complicated. Of course, Venus is in the the moon is in the Via Combustor. I mean, it's been in the Via Combustor for some time, but it's that part of a Via Combustor, the Scorpio part of a Via Combustor, where things do get more complicated, and perhaps you get more complicated as well. And the emotional dimension of things starts to creep in. You didn't think that emotions were going to be a factor, but they increasingly are becoming a factor, and that's something that you have to pay attention to. So don't assume that everything is going to be straightforward. You might do something or say something which you think is completely innocuous, but there is a surprising reaction. And what makes the moon in the Via Combustor in Scorpio so powerful, perhaps, is the fact that Venus is making a square to Uranus. And Venus is a planet connected with relationships, especially in the Aries chart. It's making a square to Uranus, and so that might indicate that some people are just difficult, and they become especially difficult when you're discussing, particular subjects, particular topics. Perhaps, the issue of money, for example, or something that you want to talk about, or maybe they want to talk about. Yeah, it is serious, and if you take it lightly and you assume everything is going to be, easy, straightforward, then it might well not be. So, I think you have to be careful who you interact with, and not everyone is pleasant. If you're meeting new people, then who exactly are you going to come across, and what kind of message are they going to deliver? And at the same time, you might discover things about other people which are surprising, and might not be particularly pleasant. And of course, this really says something about the times in which we're living. I mean, I know we hear about sort of Epstein files and all these sort of dubious people in the world, and what they're up to. But maybe it's not just the Epstein files. Maybe it just says something about the times in which we're living, and it's a time of discovery, and we're discovering perhaps how bad things are and how bad certain people are. So you don't have to try very hard to realize that things aren't as they seem. Interactions aren't as they seem. Something that was supposed to be straightforward, it could actually turn out to be very unpleasant, and that might be a good reason, as you move through the weekend, to perhaps reach for conclusion that enough is enough. You ideally you pack in the social aspect of it at the beginning of a weekend, maybe even early on Saturday, and then for the rest of the weekend, as moon moves into Scorpio, you become quieter and more discerning, and you don't feel that you have to be at the center of attention. And if you have your doubts about someone, or if you have your doubts about a particular situation, then I would perhaps suggest that you listen to your feelings. Taurus. Venus is moving through the last few degrees of Aquarius, and it is making a square to Uranus. So that arguably is the big aspect of the weekend. Now, so far I've talked about this Venus square Uranus in ways which are perhaps cautionary. I have suggested that Venus square Uranus could be a problem in general, but need it be a problem? I don't think it needs to be a problem at all. I think that this Venus square Uranus for you it can be very fortunate. It's dynamic. It brings things into focus, and I think that some things do need to go into focus. And it may relate to the fact that Uranus is moving through the last few degrees of Taurus, obviously through the last few degrees of your sign. So, very soon Uranus will be moving into Gemini, but you need to take advantage of Uranus in your sign, while it's there. Uranus is there to stir things up. It's there to help you tune into your individuality. What makes you special. And this square between Venus and Uranus, I think, is challenging. It's bringing Uranus into focus, and it's hopefully bringing your originality into focus. And originality is not vague, by the way. It's not just something we all have. It can actually be very specific, and there may be particular ways in which you want to show off your talents. So, this might relate to your ambitions, your career, whatever it is you're trying to achieve. You can do things which are special, which everyone can applaud in the end. I mean, they might not applaud it straight away, because with Venus square Uranus, you are capable actually of being very disruptive. If you want to change things, I think you certainly can. Not everyone is going to like it, but perhaps it's a situation where it is necessary, because time is passing. It really is. It's only you've only got a couple of months before Uranus leaves Taurus, and there aren't so many dynamic aspects left involving Uranus. We're about to have you're going to have Venus square Uranus, you're going to have Sun square Uranus, you're going to have Mars square Uranus, and then over the next few weeks. And I regard all of those aspects as potentially being favourable, even though they don't sound favourable, because they are challenging you. They're making you think about what you can do and what your unique contribution is. And whatever you are doing, Taurus, I think it's important to give priority to your own independence this weekend. Now, as the weekend progresses, as the moon moves out of Libra into Scorpio, this might not be quite so easy, because with the moon moving into Scorpio, well, it's moving into your opposite sign, and with that movement, there may be times when you feel you do have to consider other people's needs, and perhaps put other people's needs first. I would suggest that you don't. I think moon in Scorpio, it asks you to take into account what other people want, to bear in mind that people do have demands, but also to bear in mind that other people can be a law unto themselves. And if you completely give in to outside pressure, you're also giving in to other people's whims, and that's not what you want. And I do take you back to that square aspect between Venus and Uranus. It is about your independence and your originality, and that should be your priority over the course of this weekend. Gemini. Mercury has changed sign. It actually happened London time late on Friday, and this is a bit of a mixed blessing. Mercury moving into Pisces. I mean, Mercury does not work well in Pisces. It's not the best sign for Pisces to be. In fact, arguably, it's probably the worst. I mean, this is logical. I mean, Mercury is ruler of Virgo. it's exalted in Virgo, and so Pisces, it's the opposite. It's fallen here, and so it doesn't really work very well. I mean, why doesn't Mercury work well in Pisces? Well, the reason it doesn't work very well in Pisces is just because it's just too emotional. Pisces is a water sign. Now, Mercury can work okay in Scorpio, it can work okay in Cancer, but there's something about Pisces that is a problem. It could be just the fact that we've got this sort of watery mutability. There's a lot in Pisces to distract us. And so when Mercury goes into Pisces, we can go all over the place. We're trying to think about something in a sort of a straightforward way, but then there's the emotional content to consider. And of course, you being a Gemini, all things being equal, emotion is not necessarily the strongest suit. So you have to take all of this on board and be aware of your weaknesses, and just be aware that you may be venturing onto unfamiliar territory. And if there is a heavy sort of emotional content, you might not be able to deal with it. At least not be able to deal with it, unless you are careful. Now, there is an alternative view. Maybe it's a complementary view as well. And that is that Mercury is moving into a high-profile part of your horoscope. A part of your horoscope, often connected with success. And Mercury is moving towards a conjunction to the North Node. And this Mercury conjunct North Node indicates it's not exact at the moment, but the North Node is a fortunate point. It can be connected with Jupiter, and so Mercury is the way forward. It is a time when you can start to tune into your ambitions. And Mercury is not just moving towards a conjunction of a North Node. In the end, it makes a trine to Jupiter. So on balance, it may not be so bad. And the key thing here, Gemini, is just to be aware of yourself as an emotional being, to be aware of your emotional vulnerabilities, aware of your capacity for being distracted. Yeah, Geminis can be distracted. I say that as a Gemini myself. I can get seriously distracted. So, these distractions, well, they can go on for years. So you don't want to get distracted. And somehow you've got to handle the emotional content of your external environment without being overwhelmed by it. And, this is the message, throughout the time in which Mercury is moving through Pisces, and I'll be talking in more detail about Mercury's movement through Pisces. But just as a reminder, to think about how long Mercury is going to be in Pisces for. I mean, that's certainly something to consider. And you have to remember that Mercury is going to go retrograde in Pisces. So, in fact, Mercury is going to stay in Pisces for a bit of time. Mercury is in Pisces. In fact, Mercury's in Pisces until April. So you better get used to Mercury and being in Pisces. And I think it's going to actually be not such a bad thing for Mercury to be in Pisces. I mean, you've got between now and the middle of April to sort of work it all out and to work out, what it means for there to be sort of more emotion flying around, and also you're doing the right thing. Mercury is making a conjunction to the North Node in the same sign as the North Node. So I would have said, Gemini, really start to think about your ambitions and what you would like to achieve. And there may be moments of confusion. There may be moments where you don't entirely know what to do. But if you just hold firm to yourself, and you make some effort to understand and tune into your emotional environment, then I think you'll be okay. And between now and middle of April, I will be talking quite a lot about it. So this is not the final word on Mercury in Pisces for you, Gemini. In fact, it's more the first word. Now, something else going on, over the weekend is we've got Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, and Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter. There is certainly a lot to think about. Mercury in Pisces sesquiquadrate Jupiter. This is possibly the first real evidence that Mercury has moved into Pisces, because Mercury in Pisces is not always very focused, and the Gemini mind could be just going all over the place with Mercury making the sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. And it's kind of important also perhaps that Jupiter rules Pisces. So I think you do get a real blast of Pisces, and you have to sort of not take anything too seriously, not take other people too seriously, because this Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter might indicate a bit of friction between you and another person. You can't get on with everyone. And if you find yourself not being able to get on with someone, ask yourself what is going on. Perhaps some of the people you're in touch with are representing the new reality, a new emotional reality. And your first impulse might be to, behave in quite an aggressive way, assertive way. You don't want this. You reject certain things, but perhaps what you're seeing in terms of other people's behaviour is the shape of things to come, or at least the shape of the next couple of months. Cancer. The moon is moving into Scorpio, and this movement, by and large, takes place, over the course of Saturday. If you're in California, I think late morning, the moon moves into Scorpio. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, I think it will be early on Sunday morning. But it happens. But it's a change taking place over the course of a weekend, and moon moving into Scorpio. As I always say, is that moon in Scorpio is a place where Cancerians, feel comfortable, just as comfortable as when the moon is in Libra. But you, perhaps with moon moving into Scorpio, you can be more yourself. You can afford to perhaps be more dynamic and be more creative. And additionally, you're just feeling that things are making more sense. And that's not just because the moon is moving into Scorpio. It's also because Mercury is moving into Pisces. So those two sign changes, planets moving out of an air sign into a water sign, have a direct impact on you, because Cancer is the third water sign. Moon in Scorpio, Mercury in Pisces, and then you've got Cancer. So you pick up on those sign changes, and I think that you pick up on that in a really quite favourable way. You just feel that things are moving, things are happening, things are unfolding, and you feel quite good about it. And in general, as the weekend progresses, you get a sense that just things are sort of more natural, sort of that they're easier to deal with, and you understand what's going on. And I think that's the important point. And part of it is the fact that you haven't got all these planets in Aquarius anymore. I mean, you had all these planets in Aquarius, and for the average Cancerian, that might have been a bit troubling. It was just a little bit too much, a little bit too intense, and you were never quite sure whether you really fitted in. But now it's becoming clearer, and you are feeling a lot more comfortable. So I think that overall Cancer, this is a situation where just things really are improving, and of course, Mercury in Pisces may actually allow you to think straight. Now, we don't normally associate Mercury in Pisces with being able to think straight. I mean, Mercury is the planet of communication and thought. Pisces is a sign where it traditionally does not work well, but I think for you, Mercury moving into Pisces might actually give you clarity. Clarity that maybe other people don't have, but you have that clarity. You can see what's going on, but you can also feel what's going on, and it might be that your thoughts and your feelings are sort of on the same wavelength, finally on the same wavelength. They're all going in the same direction, and you're feeling good about your prospects, and you're able to explore things on a sort of a mental and an emotional level, and you might just pick up on things in a quite sort of natural way. In terms of how do you learn about something, there are different ways of learning. You can read, you can watch, but you can also feel, and I think that through a sort of a natural sort of osmotic process, you can understand things in a way that is very organic, and you don't have to strain yourself. So really, Cancer, it's a time when things really are starting to make sense for you. Leo, there is maybe quite a lot going on over the course of a weekend. We do have this. We have Venus making a. What do we do? We have Venus. What do we got? We got Venus square Uranus. I think that Venus square Uranus is potentially an important aspect for you. Uranus is obviously still in Taurus. Venus is still in Aquarius, your opposite sign, and Venus square Uranus in a positive sense could be about encouragement. You being encouraged to make the most of what you have. Perhaps someone does something, someone says something which you can't avoid. You just accept that you're being pushed in a particular direction. Now, are you going to be happy about it? Not necessarily. I mean, at least not to begin with. Venus in Aquarius in your opposite sign, that might represent another person, but another person you feel might not be entirely on your wavelength, and they're encouraging you to do something, not necessarily because they are telling you to do something. It's almost by their presence, what they represent, and you're aware of them, and you might not be too happy about it. But if you do find yourself being pushed in particular directions, I don't think that you should necessarily be too upset about it. Sometimes you do need a challenge, and don't forget, with Uranus moving into Taurus, this is a time to be thinking about where you are going, how you are proceeding, and if you proceed in a particular on a particular path, well, that can create changes. It can potentially create very big changes. Though always be aware of what is going on. I think that over the weekend there could be something about you that is in too much of a rush. And you might just get yourself involved in something that you don't necessarily want to get involved in. And the problem, you see, what I'm thinking about is, let me just show you what I'm thinking about. Let me just show you the 90-degree dial, because I'm looking at the sun here, and if I look at the sun, so here's a 90-degree dial, and there's the sun. So we'll put the sun we'll put the sun on the pointer. So the aspects I'm thinking about are with the sun. There's Venus, and you see Venus and Uranus are making a square aspect, and on a 90-degree dial, the Venus and Uranus come are shown as a conjunction, and then there's Mars on the other side. So that means that the Sun is on the Venus-Mars and the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So it all comes together, and this relates to perhaps the way you deal with other people, the way you come across. So other people can be a challenge, as I've just said. You've also got Mars-Uranus here. The Sun on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and that might make you accident prone. You could get yourself involved with something that you hadn't necessarily been planning on, and yeah, in certain cases things could go wrong. I'm not saying they will go wrong, I'm just saying they could go wrong. So it's not a weekend, Leo, for doing anything that is dangerous, that involves any kind of risk. So that certainly on a physical level. As far as on a social level, well, it's a bit different. As I've already said, right at the beginning of this piece on Leo, other people can be there for you. They can be a benefit. Now, as far as the moon is concerned, the moon is moving into Scorpio, and an early Scorpio, a moon in early Scorpio can sometimes be a problem. And although there are certainly opportunities going on here, I think that you can be challenged to really make the most of who you are and what you can do. But with the moon moving into Scorpio, you probably feel that some things have just gone too far, and that you just want a break. And the moon, as it moves through Scorpio, starts to make a square to Mars. Well, it makes a square to Pluto, then it makes a square to Mars, and so you might reach a point where it just does become all too much, and you want some peace. And will you get that peace? I think in the end you will get that peace, and with that moon, with Moon square Mars, by the end of a weekend, I think that you don't need necessarily to have people there for you, especially if it's a situation which is at all confrontational. So it's a problem weekend in the sense that other people are going to have a role to play. But the question is that role going to be constructive? And additionally, Leo, as I've just said, you do need to be careful how you go, because I think that on a physical level, you may be sort of slightly more sort of accident prone than usual, because the Sun is aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Virgo. There is quite a lot happening over the weekend. For one thing, Mercury is changing sign. In fact, Mercury changed sign late on Friday, London time. So Mercury is moving into Pisces, and it stays in Pisces for ages. I mean, it stays in Pisces for a couple of months until the middle of April. So what does that mean, Mercury moving into Pisces? Well, Pisces is not a sign that Mercury is particularly happy in. It's a sign where Mercury is it's fallen in Pisces, and I'm not saying it's going to be bad with Mercury in Pisces, but I think you have to be aware of the disadvantages of Mercury being in Pisces, because Pisces is your opposite sign, and you could argue that the sign Pisces represents a point where you maybe have least power, where other people have maximum control. You have to consider their views. You perhaps have to do what they say, even if they don't say anything, even if they don't push you around. You're still aware that they are influential, and being able to assert yourself, it can be hard work. But I think that you want to assert yourself still. You feel that it is important to be in control, but Mercury is going against you, or is it? Mercury is actually moving into the North Node, and the North Node is in Pisces. And so it's a time where you have to start to think about what people have to offer. You also have to think about how people could completely disrupt you, because with Mercury in Pisces, you are relatively easy to influence, and on an emotional level, you're picking up on things which perhaps you'd rather not be picking up on. But it's all very chaotic, and because it's chaotic, there is a danger of making mistakes. And so what do you do? Well, one approach to Mercury in Pisces is not necessarily to do anything, not to feel that you have to use force. If you use force, if you try to push your point, then you create a point of resistance, and where there's a point of resistance, that creates trouble. On the other hand, if you just take a more relaxed approach, if you just see what's going on, you see what's on offer, but you don't commit, and you let people play their games, you let people assert themselves, but without you being compromised. People can assert themselves. They can be pushy. They can say what's on their mind, but it needn't affect you, unless you start to resist. Because if you resist and if you push back against what's going on, in a way you're creating a problem, and it just might be better if you just watch. And so that might be a way in which Mercury moving into Pisces can work. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I think the next couple of months could be important for relationships, because, don't forget, Mercury is moving into Pisces, but very soon other planets are moving into Pisces. Next week, early next week, you've got Venus moving into Pisces, and you're going to have Sun moving into Pisces before you know it. And that does put the emphasis on the other, and so Pisces, Virgo, and so Virgo, it just might be a time when you have to really consider what other people have to offer, and certain relationships may blossom with all these Pisces planets, and you may start to really see what people can do for you. And so, do keep an open mind here, and it is an ongoing process. So it's not just one event, Mercury moving into Pisces. Once it's in Pisces, it's over. Because remember, Mercury stays in Pisces until the middle of April. Now, as far as the specifics of a weekend are concerned, you may become aware that Mercury is in Pisces, quite early, because on Saturday, Mercury in Pisces is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter rules Pisces, so there is a connection between Mercury and Jupiter. There's a double connection between Mercury and Pisces, and this might mean that on Saturday there's just a moment where you just don't know what's going on, and it occurs to you that actually things have changed. And once you realize that things have changed, you may also realize that you don't have quite as much power as you thought you had. So there might be a sudden power loss, and you feel it. And it's not a once and for all power loss. It's nothing that serious. But the reason you feel this loss of power is because something has changed, because Mercury's moved into Pisces, and it's been reinforced by the fact that Mercury is sesquiquadrate Jupiter. And that may say something about your relationship with other people. All of a sudden it may occur to you when you look at your various relationships that the other person has the power. They are more in control than you. It might in certain cases, situations, be difficult to say no. Well, sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes you have to be able to stand up to people. And maybe Virgo, you need a time to just familiarize yourself with the situation. Don't necessarily get too close to any one person, because things have changed, and if you get too close to any one person too quickly, there might be a real loss of power. And so on over the weekend you experience that. You try to respond to it. I mean, one way you might respond to it with Mercury sextile quadrate Jupiter is by doing a lot of thinking. You're trying to work out what's going on, so you have a lot of thinking. You have a lot of thinking going on. There may be a lot of talking as well. When you don't understand something, you talk to try to make sense of it. But how useful is it going to be? In a way, the more you talk, the more questions you ask, the more complicated it might become. Libra. We have a square aspect between Venus and Uranus. So, Venus is, of course, your ruler, and Venus is moving through very late Aquarius. And I hope you've enjoyed Venus moving through Aquarius. You've got a couple of days left of it being in Aquarius. I think on Tuesday it moves into Pisces. And hopefully you have a good sense, Libra, of what you can do, what you're capable of achieving, and you're confident of your creative ability. So hopefully that's how you've been feeling. But then Venus makes a square to Uranus, and with this square to Uranus, suddenly things might just seem a little more complicated, not quite as straightforward as they used to be. And maybe you assume things were going to be simple, and you do some thinking, you do some investigating, and you realize it's not easy. And if you want to see something through, it's going to require perhaps a lot more work than you had imagined. Not just work, maybe stress as well, maybe even sort of emotional stress, because things are becoming more emotional. The moon is leaving Libra, so you did have moon in Libra for the last couple of days, but over the course of Saturday, or perhaps into Sunday if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon moves out of Libra and into Scorpio. And so with the moon moving into Scorpio, things change. There's not so much air around because, don't forget, Mercury has left Aquarius, the moon has left Libra. Not so much air. There is a greater emotional content, and that might suggest that things are becoming more complicated, more complicated than you'd like them to be. And so, Libra, you have to be able to deal with those complications and not run away from them. Just accept that this is the way it is, and also perhaps accept that other people's motivations are more complicated than you had realized. You could complicate things, or other people could complicate things for you, and it may not occur to you, for example, that someone is motivated by money. You thought maybe they were motivated by the common good, or just being nice for the sake of it. But everyone has a motivation, whatever it is. And this is the times in which we're living. We're living in the era of the Epstein files, when we're seeing all sorts of strange motivations, and what seems to be the case on the surface is not necessarily what it's like sort of deep down. And you need to recognize that in terms of other people, and perhaps also you need to recognize that in terms of yourself. Consider your own motivations. You might have a story about how wonderful you are, but what really motivates you? And it may occur to you that you are motivated by things that are sort of more base, like money. And I think it's always good to be honest and open about what moves you, especially now when we have a somewhat complicated astrological situation. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's intense. It's about you understanding what is really going on, and it can be a voyage of self-discovery. So that is a way to see it. And if you want something to work for you, if you want something to continue to work for you, then you are going to have to put in the effort. As I said at the beginning, that is sort of hard work. And yeah, it might be the acceptance of a higher emotional temperature. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, things could be slightly complicated. You may be aware of your closeness to someone else, but you also might be aware of the fact that nothing lasts forever. You can see the end of things, and you can also see the way in which things can decay, and relationships can decay. So you might have the experience over the weekend of being close to someone, whoever they are, but at the same time, you can't help thinking about the history of a particular relationship, how it's been unfolding, whether it's days, weeks, months, years, decades, however, whatever it is, how it's been unfolding, and then just being aware of just a feeling of decay, that nothing does last forever. And if you do feel a sense of decay, especially with other people, don't be upset about it. It's kind of almost decay and affection working at the same time, and yeah, that can seem sad, but it's the way it happens, and it may just be something short term, because nothing does last forever. We don't last forever. Relationships don't last forever. In the end, something has to end, and maybe that's part of what's going on, and part of why this weekend is so intense. But I mean, don't worry, it's only astrology. Scorpio. The moon is moving into your sign over the course of the weekend. If you're on the west coast of the US, then this morning, Saturday morning, the moon will be in Scorpio. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, that might not be until Sunday morning, early on Sunday morning. But still, it's getting there. The moon is moving into your sign, and I think that that feels good, especially as Mercury is also moving into a water sign. So we've got the moon and Mercury changing sign, moving out of an air sign into a water sign, and that's kind of what you want to hear. It means that you're feeling better, and you understand what's going on. Things are just a lot more straightforward, and that's definitely to be welcome. We had this big build up in Aquarius. We had 5 planets in Aquarius, but now Mercury is leaving Aquarius, it's moving into Pisces, and that means, Scorpio, that you're probably going to be losing some of your intensity. Things aren't quite as serious as they used to be. You can start to see possibilities, for action. You don't feel quite so rooted to the spot. And maybe what's happened is that, while all those planets were in Aquarius, you were getting comfortable, you were getting familiar with something. You just needed time to unwind and find your place amongst the swirling chaos that we're in. And you found that place, and now that Mercury is moving into Pisces, that just shows that you're feeling better. Perhaps you're able to be more flexible. Also, you're able to be sort of more playful, perhaps. And the moon does make a trine to Mercury, so that's one of the aspects over the course of the day. Moon in early Scorpio making a trine to Mercury in early Pisces, and that means that you can communicate what's on your mind. You can tell people tell people perhaps about the way you feel, and I think that you can afford to be more forthcoming. But you don't want to be sociable for the sake of being sociable. I mean, while things are starting to flow, there is a feeling that not everything is fine in the outside world. The people you meet, the situations you observe, seem almost unseemly, almost sort of rather squalid. Yeah, you feel the squalor around you. I mean, yeah, not in your immediate environment, but you can just see it, and you can see squalor. Is squalor the right word? There's almost something sordid about it. You can see perhaps the sordidness of other people, perhaps even people you know well, and maybe even you're attracted to things that are sordid over the course of a weekend. It's not necessarily going to happen. I'm just saying that it could happen, and it may also be about your interest. What you find yourself focusing on as you traverse the world, as you traverse the internet. You can see how unpleasant things are, and it just can't be avoided. And it might just be of interest to you. I mean, Scorpios can be interested in things like that, but you don't want to push it too far. You want to keep a distance, and maybe this is a reminder that you had all these planets in Aquarius. Why were all these planets in Aquarius? Well, because these planets were in Aquarius because they had something to say to you. And the advantage of having 5 planets in Aquarius, of course now it's only 4 planets in Aquarius, was that it was perhaps grounding and anchoring, and perhaps prevented you from getting into trouble. But still, this weekend, as the moon moves into Scorpio, I do think that you are feeling better about yourself, and you're now feeling that you can look after yourself, and that means that you can start to perhaps expand your operations, and that becomes clear as you move into the new week. Sagittarius. Right now, Sagittarius, you continue to be quite combative in your overall attitude, and it may be intensified by the fact that Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. And of course, Jupiter is your ruler, and with this Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter, you're going to take certain things seriously, and you're going to see how you might be restricted. And the issue of restriction, has been brewing, over the last, I don't know, the last few days, maybe longer. What is holding you back? And as I was saying yesterday, you may be of the view that some things just don't change. They cannot be changed. They instead have to be broken apart. Dramatic change is the only way of pushing things through. And this Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter could really stir you up. It could be irritating, the Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter, but at the same time, it makes it clear to you that things can't necessarily carry on as they have done, and this might say something about relationships. Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter is an aspect that can be linked to other people, perhaps even to one other person. And Sagittarius, if you're honest with yourself, you may be aware of how you and other people are different. You're on a different wavelength. You can't share everything with everyone, and there just may be a difference of opinion. So the question is, what do you do? What do you do with that? And one approach with Mercury sesquiquadrate Pluto is to try to work with it. Mercury, say that again, Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter is to work with it, to see what kind of connections you can form with another person, how damaged connections can perhaps be repaired. So that is an approach. But I think just some Sagittarians are going to feel that enough is enough. that your connections with certain things are not necessarily doing you any good, and that you need to break free. Now, I'm not saying that some long-lasting relationship has to bite the dust or anything like that, but there may be other kinds of relationship which maybe less central to your existence, but they're still important. Maybe it's a set of relationships that has just maybe had its day, and that you need to think about how you're going to move on. And but it does seem to me to be clear, Sagittarius, but as far as you're concerned, something does have to give. It may not be immediately easy to express this realization, but sooner or later it will become obvious. And when I say sooner or later, it might be as early as the beginning of a week, when the moon moves into your, the beginning of next week, when the moon moves into your sign. Capricorn. The moon is now in Scorpio, so it's moving out of Libra, and that's perhaps good as far as the weekend is concerned. With the moon in Libra, you perhaps felt that there were just things that had to be done, and you weren't ready to sort of relax, be yourself. You always felt that there was, you just felt there was an obligation, and maybe that was just a hangover from the week, from earlier in the week. But when the moon moves to Scorpio, whenever it is, whether it's a Saturday morning in California or early on Sunday morning in Australia or New Zealand, whenever it is, you're going to, I think, feel better, feel more relaxed, and you might make better company, because the moon in Scorpio does make a trine to Mercury in Pisces. So with the moon and Mercury making a trine aspect, I think that things should move quite quickly, and I think that your ability to communicate is going to be excellent. You may have felt that you sort of lost that ability to communicate, that it wasn't always easy to tell people how you felt, but now it's relatively straightforward. So I think that you're feeling over the weekend that things are getting better, things are improving, and additionally, if there's something important that needs to be said to really get everyone's attention, then I think really that shouldn't be a problem. And I think you're getting people to listen to you really is going to be very easy. Now, not everyone is going to like what you have to say. I mean, one of the aspects we have today is a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Jupiter. Quite a verbal sesquiquadrate, and you may feel that something has to be expressed that perhaps it wasn't being expressed, and something is expressed that it may not be easy, but if it's said now with Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter, I think that you'll get a reaction, and I think that you'll get quite a favourable reaction, and it's not the case that you always have to be worrying about other people and what they're doing. There's also what you are doing and what you are planning, and how your mind is working. And with Mercury moving into Pisces, well, you might say Mercury moving into Pisces is a problem, because Mercury doesn't work very well in Pisces, all things being equal. But I think for you it's okay. I don't think Mercury in Pisces is going to present you with any problems at all. I think that Mercury in Pisces, if you handle it correctly, you'll be able to work on both a sort of an intellectual and an emotional level. And while the Mercury moves into Pisces, while Mercury is moving through those first degrees of Pisces, you might have an inspiration. Something just suddenly becomes clear, and it becomes clear to you that a particular action is required. And now might be the time, Capricorn, to decide what it is that that needs to be done. And maybe this weekend, particularly late in the weekend, you can make a start. Aquarius. The Aquarius emphasis is starting to break down. So on Friday evening, London time, Mercury moved out of Aquarius. So now there are only 4 planets in Aquarius, and it's going to continue like this. You know, Tuesday Venus moves out of Aquarius, and then in just over a week the Sun will move out of Aquarius, and in the end there'll be nothing left in Aquarius except for Pluto. So as these planets leave Aquarius, it should perhaps be seen as a way of letting things go. Maybe you've been working things out, you know, in your own way, and things have got very intense and very focused on you. And when you hit a sort of a point of maximum focus, which has kind of already happened, then you let go, and you additionally may be revealing yourself, revealing what you have been working on. So you could almost see this period of all these planets in Aquarius as being a process of intense activity when you're trying to make things as good as possible, and then you see what happens. You start to put this energy into practice, you release it, and you see what the actual substance is. And I think that may be part of it. You know, where is it all going? Is it going to be successful? Is it not going to be successful? Is it going to give you a reward? I mean, these are the kind of questions you might be thinking about as these planets start to move, you know, out of Aquarius and, you know, out of Aquarius into Pisces. And certainly Mercury has just gone into Pisces, and of course Saturn is in Pisces already. So perhaps this also emphasizes the fact that, you know, Saturn is about to leave Pisces. It's about to move into Aries, and over the next couple of weeks, well, perhaps you should be thinking about things which are concrete and material, and perhaps have a financial nature, and that could be the nature of Mercury in Pisces. You know, Pisces in the Aquarian chart is a financially orientated sign, and so there could be things to think about of a financial nature, and that might sound problematic because Mercury, all things being equal, is not particularly well placed in Pisces. Mercury is fallen in Pisces, but Mercury is moving towards the North Node. North Node is in Pisces, so with Mercury moving towards the North Node, it seems to me that the right thing for you to do, Aquarius, is to think about money. That should be your goal. That should be your focus. You know, okay, not money for money's sake, but you have to see money as being a means by which you can give yourself security, you can achieve your ends, you can satisfy some of your creative needs. It's got a role, and it certainly should not be discounted. And with Mercury in Pisces, if we try to look at Mercury in Pisces in the most constructive way, Mercury in Pisces is emotional. It has an understanding of changing trends, changing fashions, what's going on in society, what's going on in the business cycle. Mercury in Pisces can give insights into all of this, especially now when the moon is making a trine to Mercury. So moon moving into Scorpio, which it does over the weekend, then makes a trine, which makes an immediate trine to Mercury. I think that should be quite good. I think it should allow you to think about your priorities, and that there may be just a moment where it becomes clear what you've neglected in the past and what you need to do in the future. So do look out for that moment of clarity, because somewhere in the weekend, it is there. If you're in the Americas, it will be earlier in the weekend. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, it will probably be later in the weekend. But it's something to focus on, and it's not necessarily that you have to try too hard to look for this moment of clarity. It will just happen. There will be a moment where you understand what needs to be done, and after that you can then bring together a concrete plan of action. So I think that does look good. We also have a square between Venus and Uranus. Venus is in Aquarius. It's still in Aquarius for a couple more days. I think it's on Tuesday that Venus leaves Aquarius. So with Venus square Uranus, you might see that as a trigger aspect. Uranus has been in Taurus for some time, and I've talked about this for the last couple of days, and it is about what do you mean. It is about security. It's about what do you mean by security, where do you feel comfortable, where do you feel grounded. And Venus may be an incident or an encounter which brings all of this home. I mean, almost quite literally brings this all home, and you realize what security means, where you feel insecure, and perhaps someone else or a particular situation reminds you of what security and what insecurity actually means. And once you get it, you'll be able to take the necessary action. So that might be a theme of a weekend, Aquarius, having a couple of moments of realization, and from then on you really start to know what needs to be done. Pisces. Mercury is moving into your sign. In fact, Mercury moved into your sign late on Friday, London time. And so with Mercury in your sign, I would have said that's good news. And Mercury is just the first. There are going to be other planets moving into Pisces very soon. On Tuesday, we've got Venus moving into Pisces. Then a bit later, we've got the Sun moving into Pisces. And at some stage, Mars will be moving into Pisces. Now, Mercury does stay in Pisces for a long time because it goes retrograde in Pisces. So it actually stays in Pisces until the middle of April. So, a lot can happen in 2 months. And with Mercury in Pisces, I think I'm pretty sure it's going to work in your favor. Even though it's said that Mercury is fallen in Pisces, I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think it's a time with Mercury, Mercury conjunct the North Node, when you're going to be able to actually think straight. Now, one doesn't normally associate Mercury in Pisces with thinking straight, because one thinks that Mercury in Pisces is going to go all over the place, getting distracted by this, that, and everything else. But I don't think this need be the case. I think that you will just know what is right for you, and you also have to think about North Node in Pisces. I think it's about you. You are the person that matters. It's not someone else. And Mercury in Pisces gives you the insights you need to assert yourself. And Mercury is also the communication planet. And I think that you're going to be able to express yourself in quite an interesting way. It's not like just expressing yourself in a sort of shouting, dynamic fashion. It's not like that. But it's about knowing what needs to be said at particular times. Sometimes it's best to stay silent. And one thing about Mercury in Pisces, Pisces is a mute sign, because fish supposedly don't make any noise. The other water signs are also mute. Cancer, crab, and Scorpion. Fish, crabs, scorpions, they don't make any noise. It's a mute sign. So don't underestimate the power of silence. And the power of silence It's not just about this weekend, it's about the next couple of months. I'm not saying you have to be silent all the time. I'm not saying you have to be a Trappist. It's not like that. But there'll be moments when, or maybe days on end, where nothing needs to be said. And the less you say, the stronger you are. And that is something to consider. In certain cases, by talking too much, you are making yourself vulnerable. You are revealing too much about yourself. So with Mercury and Pisces, I think if you're in a position where you can listen to your heart, you'll know what to say, you'll know when to say, but most importantly, you'll know when to keep quiet, when you just can do some thinking, contemplating, and if you want to do something, if you feel it's very important that you do something, very often the best way to do that is to say nothing, because if you say something, you're advertising your intentions, and the moment you advertise your intentions, well, you're mobilizing other people, and they can find strategies to stop you doing what you're planning. So it may very often be the case that silence is golden, but all the while, Pisces, that some things need to change. But things can't go on as they have done in the past, and you have the capacity to be an agent of change, but you do it in a way that is very subtle. And finally, I should say something about relationships. Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter on Saturday, and this sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, well, sesquiquadrate is often seen as a difficult aspect, but we shouldn't forget that Mercury is in your sign, Jupiter is your ruler, and so I'm thinking that this sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Jupiter could actually be quite constructive. So with Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter, what would you do? What should you do? Accept that you and other people don't always get on. That's the first thing you accept with a sesquiquadrate. There is a dynamic tension here, but because Mercury and Jupiter have a sympathy with one another, them both being in water signs, that means that there is a way through, and perhaps through dynamic interaction with the right people, you can actually strengthen relationships rather than weaken them. So if you find that or feel that you and another person don't get on as well with one another as you should do, it's not a situation that you have to necessarily accept. There are active steps you can take to get closer to another person, and perhaps to also sort of resolve sort of outstanding differences, if that is what you want. And that's it with the 12 signs. And now it's time to shift to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 64, which is before completion. This is the last hexagram, the last of the 64, and it's telling us that we're close to the end, or it might feel that we're close to the end. It's still in a position though where we have to cross the river. The river has not been crossed, and the question is, are we able to make that crossing? And when we do make that crossing, well, all sorts of bad things can happen. We can fall in, we can lose our cool, whatever. And so we have to be aware of this, of the real vulnerability of the situation. I mean, it's not at all easy, and it's possible as we get close that we might just mess it up. And so the question is, what do we do? And we have got 2 moving lines, and the third line moves, and also the fifth line. So the third line here, it's a broken line, and so it moves to an unbroken line. And the third line represents a transition from the bottom trigram to the top trigram. So the bottom lines, you've got the bottom 3 lines and the top 3 lines. So that third line is about a transition we have to make. I mean, inevitably you're going to have to make it, because if it's before completion, you've got to make that transition. You've got to cross the river. But the problem is we're not strong enough. So this I Ching this reading, or at least this line, represents a contradiction. We're supposed to cross the river, but we can't cross the river. So what do we do? Now, there are different ways of interpreting it. James Legge, in his translation of the I Ching, he actually suggests it might be a typo, or something, not a typo, but the ancient Chinese equivalent of a typo, that a negative got missed out. He's suggesting it was saying you should not cross the river, rather than to cross the river. I mean, at least that's James Legge's view. I don't think James Legge actually used the I Ching. He was just an academic, and I think that we have to work with what we have. And so, if you need to cross the river, but you're not strong enough to cross the river, what do you do? Well, what you could do is you create a change. You have to create something which is very different. It's perhaps an acknowledgement that your particular plan for completing the task as it stands simply is not good enough. Something needs to change. It may not even just not be good enough. It needs to be completely discarded, and you need to come up with a totally different strategy. Because if you just carry on as you were expecting to do, then you might not make it. So do think about that change, and think about what needs to be done, and be honest with yourself. Be honest that right now you don't have sufficient strength to make the transition. And then we've got the fifth line moving, and the fifth line is a much better line. It is about being successful. You can cross a river. You can complete the task, but you just have to do it in the right way. And that might mean that you need to get support. You need to get help, and I think that help is going to be available. You certainly don't have to do things. Certainly don't have to do things on your own, and so you're able to make that transition. But the question then is, what happens once you've made that transition? Once you've got a sense of completion, and well, you move to a second hexagram, and you move to hexagram number 44. Now, hexagram 44 is a sociable hexagram. It's a hexagram often connected with relationships, and it's not necessarily an easy hexagram. So you make a transition, and then there are people you supposedly have to deal with, and it's I don't know. It reminds me of a situation I was in a long time ago. I had made this transition. I was in India, and it was the early 80s, and I'd just taken a train from from the south of India to Agra, where the Taj Mahal was. So I'd made this huge transition from the right southern tip of India to the north. It took me 2 days. And after 2 days, I was completely exhausted, and I didn't really have much money left. I was coming to the end of my time in India. These are the days when you could go to India with £300 and stay there for a couple of months. Literally, I thought I had £300 in travellers' checks, and that was enough. And it was really awful, because I met this. Well, it wasn't that bad, but I met some guy at the station. This guy. And I thought I was really sorted out in India. I'd got to grips with dealing with all the aggravation and people trying to rip me off and all of that. And I thought I was really tough and together, and I was just tired. And this guy just he insisted on he sort of taking me to his shop and made me buy all these semi-precious stones. I mean, I didn't spend that much money. I mean, I didn't spend, it was, I don't know, £20 or something, but I really needed that £20. And he persuaded me to buy all this junk, and it was really annoying. And because I'd made the transition before completion, and then coming to meet, this guy just persuaded me to. I know £20 isn't that much money, but it just made my last few days in India even just really difficult, and I barely had enough money for the airport for the airport tax. I didn't hardly had enough money to get to the airport to leave the country. I mean, I did manage to leave the country in the end, but anyway, that's perhaps how it might work. You make the transition, you do something, and you finally get there, and it's really exhausting, and then something happens. And so in the end, be very careful about other people. Other people are very friendly, or it may not even be other people. It may be a situation that you just don't have to get involved in, but it's tempting. And coming to meet does represent someone who is trying to take control. That's the aim. And what you have to do here is to think about your independence. Your independence really matters to you. You've got to hold on to your independence, through thick and thin, and because in that way you've got to safeguard your victory. I mean, there will be a victory this weekend. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be easy, but you can get there. You can cross a river, and once you've crossed the river and you've achieved what you have to achieve, then don't mess it up. Don't be like me in Agra, giving my last remains of my money to some stranger for junk. But anyway, I think if you handle it in the right way, I think in the end it could be quite a good weekend. And finally, I want to look at Mercury in Pisces. I'm not going to talk for very long about Mercury in Pisces, but anyway, so Mercury moved into Pisces at late on Friday. So here's the chart for Mercury in Pisces. Where has it gone? This is the moment Mercury moved into Pisces. So it happened on February the 6th, which is Friday, 10:48 London time. So for most of us, it's going to be pretty much all of us. This weekend, Mercury's going to be in Pisces throughout the weekend, and it's going to stay in Pisces. And the reason it's going to stay in Pisces is because of retrograde motion. So if we track what Mercury is doing in Pisces, just to let you know how it's all going to work out. So Mercury runs through Pisces, and then the end of February, the 26th, at around 22 Pisces, 22, 23 Pisces, it goes retrograde. And it goes all the way back to, then it goes direct at 8 Pisces on the 20th of March. And finally, Mercury moves into Aries on the 15th of April. So for the next couple of months, this is where Mercury is going to be in. Now, traditionally, Mercury doesn't really work very well in Pisces. I mean, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because sorry, let me just plug something in. The reason this doesn't make sense is because Mercury is exalted in Virgo. It rules Virgo. So when it's in the opposite sign of Virgo, Pisces, it's not a great place for Mercury. And the thing is that Pisces is just, it's too watery. It's mutable. So Mercury kind of goes all over the place, and it can get distracted. It can get seriously distracted, and it can reach the wrong conclusions. It can listen to the wrong people, and so that is a fundamental problem with Mercury in Pisces. So it is regarded as being a problem planet. Now, does that mean to say that it's bad that Mercury goes into Pisces? Well, I don't think so. I think it's just a question of how we deal with it. We need to be aware of our own and other people's capacity for making mistakes, for reaching the wrong conclusions, for being distracted. People might have good arguments, and we listen to those arguments. People might be charismatic and charming. We're taken in by it, and we make mistakes, and we might potentially suffer from those mistakes. Now, Mercury in Pisces, it's also moving into a mute sign. So the mute signs are the water signs, which are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And the logic for saying that it's a mute signs is because the animals who represent those signs don't make any noise. Scorpions don't make any noise. Fish don't make any noise. And fish don't make any noise. And what's the other one? Crabs don't make any noise. At least that's a theory. Maybe they do make noise. I don't know. Or maybe they can make noise. So with Mercury being in a mute sign, that might say, well, there's less to be said. You don't have to speak. And perhaps there's a strength in one's silence. This is what I was kind of telling Pisces. There is a strength in one's silence. If you are silent, you are keeping your thoughts to yourself. And, additionally, you are, well, maybe not embarrassing yourself. So if you have reached the wrong conclusions, you are reaching the wrong conclusions, and you tell everyone what you're thinking, well, you might get embarrassed. But there is an alternative approach to looking at Pisces. Pisces, Mercury in Pisces, it can be quite deceptive. And Neptune as a sign can be deceptive, and it can do things in a sort of a roundabout way. It is silent, and maybe there can be an advantage in silence, and it can also be quite scheming. It depends on the rest of the chart usually, but Mercury can not reveal its intentions because it's a silent sign, and it can work out what the best strategy is. And the flip side of that is the spirituality of Mercury in Pisces. Should you say that Mercury in Pisces is spiritual? No, not on its own. Mercury, to a great extent, is a planet which reflects what is around it. But, you could say, oh, Mercury in Pisces is telepathic. You can pick things up. Mercury is a communication planet. So it can pick up on other people's feelings. Is that telepathy? I don't know. I mean, it depends, doesn't it? So there's certainly a sensitivity to Mercury and Pisces. There's no doubt about that, and it's a sensitivity to what is going on emotionally, and so there can be an advantage here. Now, as far as this Mercury in Pisces is concerned, I think it is relevant that the North Node is in Pisces at the same time. So Mercury and the North Node are both in the same sign, and the North Node is the path forward, supposedly, and so that's maybe not so bad. And when you think about the North Node, it's often connected with Jupiter. It's a Jupiter-like influence, as opposed to a South Node, which is Saturn-like. But Mercury and the North Node are both ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter rules Pisces, so Jupiter's in Cancer. So there's a strong Jupiter underpinning Mercury in Pisces and the North Node in Pisces. So Mercury in Pisces may not be quite so bad, given the fact that it is ruled by Jupiter in Cancer. And that fortunate element to Jupiter may be intensified once Jupiter goes direct, because Jupiter is, of course, still retrograde. So because of that, it may not be so bad. And we also, additionally, we shouldn't forget that Mercury is moving towards a trine of Jupiter. There's a trine relationship between Mercury and Jupiter. So for those reasons, I don't think Mercury moving into Pisces, is quite as bad as it looks on the surface. And we have to track Mercury as it goes through the sign, and there will be times, when Mercury in Pisces is under particular pressure. I'm thinking in particular when it is, when it's retrograde. So, for example, so when Mercury goes retrograde, it certainly weakens. And so the time when Mercury is going to be at its absolute weakest, when we really might feel the Pisces energy here, would be, so it goes retrograde on, so if it goes retrograde on the 17th, and so, sorry, that's not true. Mercury goes retrograde on at the end of February, and then, you see, when it goes retrograde, it starts moving towards a conjunction of the Sun. And so on around, I don't know, approximately, when does that happen? So around the 7th, 8th of March, something like that, you have a conjunction between this Mercury and the Sun. So the Mercury is combust, and it's retrograde, and it's Pisces. And it's in Pisces. So there will be a moment when Mercury is incredibly weak, when it could be problematic. But if we look at the overall period of Mercury moving through Pisces, with Jupiter in Cancer being its ruler, and also being close to the North Node, maybe it's not such a bad thing. And finally, I just wanted to look at a few people who have Mercury in Pisces, just to give us an idea about how Mercury in Pisces can work. And one of the people is the Turkish president. So, President of Turkey, Recep Erdogan. Sorry about the pronunciation. I don't have a time of birth for him. Erdogan. Sorry about my pronunciation. So he definitely has Mercury in Pisces, and his conjunct Venus. And he has a Sun in Pisces as well. And this perhaps gives us an idea about the way Pisces can work. I mean, Pisces can be quite a slippery sign, and it can be clever. And clearly, from a political perspective, Erdogan is really clever. He knows how to stay in power in Turkey. He knows how to manipulate the system. And, with a Mercury-Venus conjunction in Pisces, well, you have to look at how that Mercury is moderated. Okay, he might have a combust Mercury because it's conjunct the Sun, but that Venus, Venus in Pisces is, it's great. It's in its exaltation, very close to Mercury, so it just gives him a charm, just an easy charm, and it's in a water sign, and so for him. This might be an example of how Mercury in Pisces could work very well. On the way, he might make some mistakes. He might make mistakes, for example, about the Turkish economy. But from a political point of view, you can certainly see the advantage of having Mercury in Pisces. And another politician who has Mercury in Pisces is Angela Rayner. So Angela Rayner was Deputy Prime Minister. Keir Starmer is in real trouble. There is a very high chance that Angela Rayner takes over from him. We don't know this for sure, but she she has Mercury in Pisces. Now, she does make a few mistakes. For example, she didn't properly pay her property, had to pay a tax because she sold a house, and she would, in order to buy, I don't quite know. She sold a house. No, she bought another. She bought another property, and she was supposed to pay a tax somewhere along the line, and a reasonable amount of money, I don't know, £40,000, and she didn't pay it, and she sort of claims, she didn't understand, she got confused, whatever, and so that might be Mercury in Pisces. So maybe intellectually there may be times when she doesn't fully get it. On the other hand, Mercury in Pisces. She's got Sun in Aries, Mercury in Pisces. Mercury is the way she thinks, and the way she feels as well. So thinking and feeling, there's a certain spontaneity to Mercury in Pisces, and maybe she is able to just get the mood in the room, something which Keir Starmer patently just cannot do. And so one thing about her Mercury in Pisces, which may be a benefit to her, is the fact that Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. So she has Jupiter in Virgo. She has in fact, she's got Mercury in the opposite sign. So they are in opposition aspect, but having a mutual reception between Mercury and Jupiter, it gives that Mercury some dignity. It gives it real dignity, and it perhaps allows that Mercury to function adequately. And certainly she has a good sense of the mood in the Labour Party. I mean, it doesn't take away from the fact that she's got Mercury in Pisces, and there are some issues with Mercury in Pisces. Likewise with Jupiter in Virgo. Jupiter in Virgo can be someone who is materialistic without seeing the larger vision, and she has her own company. She's about to have a book published. She may have come from a working class environment, a working class background, but she knows how to look after herself materially and to work the system on her behalf, and that may be Jupiter in Virgo. And someone else with Mercury in Pisces is Baron Trump, Donald Trump's son. Now, some people say I shouldn't talk about Baron Trump's chart because he's not a public figure. He's only a public figure because of his father. But I'm not going to say anything particularly negative about his chart. I mean, just to point out that with Mercury in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces, it is a mute sign, and I often wonder how much he talks. We haven't heard him in public. I mean, apparently he says lots of things in private, but I think a lot of people are quite interested with Baron Trump's pronouncements. For example, it was said that Baron Trump advised his father to get interviewed by Joe Rogan, and that he was maybe giving his father some advice. And Mercury in Pisces may well have political instincts. I mean, who knows? And his Mercury is rising, so he's got Pisces rising. So Pisces rising in the Northern Hemisphere. This is the rarest rising sign in the Northern Hemisphere. Well, I don't know about the latitude for New York, but certainly for the latitude for London, Pisces is rising for less than an hour. So only in a London latitude, less than 1 in 24 people have Pisces rising, assuming people are born evenly over the course of the day. So I think that his Mercury in Pisces, is interesting, and he's also got his Mercury in Pisces trine Jupiter. So that could be quite fortunate, and I really would like to know how that Mercury is working in Baron Trump's chart, and I suppose we'll just have to wait. We'll just have to wait to see how it develops. But you can imagine that he is picking up a huge amount on the way. I mean, emotionally, Baron Trump, there's a lot going on. There's a lot he must be picking up about his father, his relationship between his father and his country, his parents, the emotional environment in which he's living. And he must be picking up a huge amount and not necessarily always talking about it, even though his Mercury is rising. Now, Mercury in Pisces at its worst, well, at its worst, there's Lichtman. Oh, no, not at its worst. I mean, this is an example of Mercury in Pisces making a mistake. Lichtman, God, I can't remember his first name. Lichtman was this sort of historian who told us for sure that Trump was going to lose because of the election, because he'd done his research and he said he'd never been wrong. And he was quite adamant that he was going to get it right. And he has a sun in Aries, but he had Mercury in Pisces. And I think we could see with his prediction that he got it wrong because of his subjectivity. He clearly was not a fan of Trump. He was a supporter of the Democrats, and he allowed his own prejudices to interfere with the predictive processes. I mean, some have said that using the logic of his own methodology for predicting winners of presidential elections, he should have chosen Trump. But anyway, he didn't. And so with Lichtman, there is, so was it Alan Lichtman? I think that was his first name. With Alan Lichtman, he was just overwhelmed by his own subjectivity, and that can be a problem with Mercury in Pisces. Now, as far as people who are pretty unsavory, Joseph Mengele, the sort of war criminal who, the Nazi who did experiments in concentration camps, he had Mercury in Pisces. Now, you would think, on the surface, that Mercury in Pisces might be compassionate. Well, I don't think you can ever say that a planet in a water sign is compassionate. Rather, a planet in a water sign can just go with the flow. Wherever the flow takes it, one just goes with it. And to my mind, if you want to really understand Pisces in terms of Nazism, then there's a comment by Goering. Goering was not a Pisces, by the way. Goering was a Capricorn. But Goering said, I don't know how serious he was, but he said, "The name of my conscience is Adolf Hitler." And so that, even though it's a pronouncement of a Capricorn, seems to be an incredibly Pisces thing to say. Just absorbing into something. Mercury in Pisces, just going with the flow, however horrific that flow is. And with Mercury in Pisces, it's also, he's got the sun in Pisces. A number of the worst Nazis, by the way, had their sun in Pisces. Joseph Mengele, Adolf Eichmann, Heydrich were all Pisceans. They just go with the flow. And they can also be very deceptive, silence. And that is indeed what Joseph Mengele did in the end. He was able somehow to just fade into the background as the war ended and end up in South America and lead a relatively comfortable life, even though in the end I think he died of drowning. Or did he have a heart attack and then he drowned? I'm not quite sure. He was dead in the river. Maybe that says something about his Pisces. And with Pisces, you can do a lot of plotting and planning. And Bin Laden had Osama bin Laden had his Mercury in Pisces. He had a Mercury-Venus conjunction in Pisces. And I think that Mercury-Venus conjunction in Pisces is very talented. Clearly he was someone who was talented, who had a degree of charisma, being the head of Al-Qaeda. And Mercury in Pisces is always perhaps one step ahead. He knows when to keep quiet. And it can also plan and plot. And that would include planning the the 9/11 attacks. And finally, just to show that you can be a successful business person with Mercury in Pisces, there is Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch of this sort of press baron, was it News International? He was famous for. I'm not quite sure what the state of the thing is now. So he was born in 1931. So Rupert Murdoch, that would mean he's going to be, God, he's coming up for his 95th birthday, and he was able, I think, to use his Mercury in Pisces to sort of maximum effect. Notice how he's got Jupiter in Cancer and Mercury in Pisces. So Mercury is ruled by, a strong Jupiter in Cancer, and it's like what I was saying now. Mercury, we've got Jupiter in Cancer now. So this sort of echoes Rupert Murdoch's horoscope. And he was very clever, and he was able to act behind the scenes. I mean, one thing I still remember in the early 80s when he completely changed the whole way newspapers were published. You used to have print setters and so forth, and he kind of did it overnight. He was able to just move his whole operations from, I can't remember, was it from Fleet Street to, was it Canary Wharf? It was a long time ago, and he did it really very quickly. Almost, he was almost able to deceive the unions, and he just did it, and it was a fait accompli. And so, being a clever businessman, understanding what people want with Mercury in Pisces. If you are a press baron, you've got to understand your readership. You've got to give your readership what they want, and I think that was part of the key to his success. So Mercury in Pisces, it needn't be such a bad placement, and with Mercury going into Pisces now and staying in Pisces for a couple of months, perhaps we shouldn't be too worried about it. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.